Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to get started with a few accessibility reminders, and then we'll introduce ourselves. As folks may have noticed as you are joining, this webinar is being recorded, and we will be sharing the post-production of the event in the weeks ahead. So please stay tuned for our updates to come. We will be sure to be sharing that widely. Today's accessibility, today we have American Sign Language interpretation, as well as communication access real-time translation, also known as CART. We thank our ASL interpreters, Debbie and Teresa, who are spotlighted for everyone to see today. And we also thank our CART captioner, Tara, from Caption Access. The CART captions are embedded in Zoom. To access the CART captions, click on the CC button on your Zoom navigation bar. And you can also change your caption settings from there as well. And we will have a link in the chat to a separate screen with the CART captions for folks as well. If you have any technical difficulties, please let us know in the chat or email us at PRIA, which is PRIYA @disasterstrategies.org. So I'll begin to introduce myself and ourselves here. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Shaylin Sluzales. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a younger disabled woman with light complexion, and I have past the shoulder length curly brown hair that is pulled back today, and I am wearing a navy blue colored shirt. Alongside me is...
Hola a todos. My name is Herman Parodi. I use he, her pronouns. I am Puerto Rican disabled man, sitting in my wheelchair. I have long, dark brown hair pulled back, and I'm wearing a red polo shirt. Shayla and I are behind us. You see a desk and a blue floral tapestry on the wall. We are the co-executive directors of the Partnership for Inclusive Disaster Strategies. And for those of us that may not know, us at the partnership, we are the only national disability-led organization focused solely on the rights, needs, and inclusion of people with disabilities and others with access and functional needs before, during, and after disasters. And thank you all for joining us today.
This is Shaylin speaking, and thank you all for joining this national virtual press conference for the Ready for Disasters Act. And READI is an acronym REAADI, which stands for Real Emergency Access for Aging and Disability Inclusion, Ready for Disasters Act. And those bill numbers in the House is HR 4938 and S 2658 in the Senate. And the Disaster Relief Medicaid Act, also known as DRMA, is the bill numbers in the House is HR 4937, and in the Senate is S 2646. We encourage folks to check out more on readi.com. That's REAADI.com for more information, tools and resources, and access to information to continue the advocacy work for these vital pieces of legislation. A little bit of background for folks that are aware and may not know. On Thursday, August 5th of 2021, Senator Casey, along 6 other senators, introduced the Ready for Disasters Act and the Disaster Relief Medicaid Act in the Senate. That following Friday, August 6th of 2021, Representative Langevin, along 7 other representatives, introduced the Ready for Disasters Act in the House, which has now grown to 13 co-sponsors since introduction. And Representative Panetta, along 2 other representatives in the House, introduced the Disaster Relief Medicaid Act. At reintroduction of these bills during this 117th Congress, the Ready for Disasters Act and the Disaster Relief Medicaid Act have garnered support from 110 organizations and 120 individuals from across the country, including many of you here with us today. Thank you all. And it certainly takes all of us to get words into legislation and legislation into law. And we are so thankful for all of you, for our partners, our colleagues on the Hill, especially Senator Casey, Congressman Langevin, and Congressman Panetta, and all of our committed advocates across the country who have come together to put words into legislation and now coming together to get these legislations into law. As September is known as National Preparedness Month, we at the partnership see time and time again how little personal preparedness can get people with disabilities during disasters and emergencies. And we all in the disability community know that this is largely due to the lack of inclusive emergency management and systems that are designed with and for us. And that is why we're all here today, to celebrate the reintroduction of these vital pieces of legislation that were crafted by disabled people, for disabled people, before, during, and after disasters and emergencies.
Again, we have a great lineup today. We have over 100 people with us in Zoom, and this is being casted on Facebook as well. Why don't we get started? We are our first speaker is Michael Campbell McCormick with Senator Casey, and the Disability Policy Director with the United States Senate Special Committee on Aging. We are so grateful to have Michael with us today. For the last 5 years during our collective writing and work to get REAADI and DRMA into Congress and into law. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Shaylin and Erman, much appreciated. I think I have my video running, or actually it says it's disabled from your end. So I just wanted to offer a couple of comments at the onset here, and actually reinforce one of the things that Shaylin just emphasized, and that's that to move this policy forward, it takes all segments of the community to actually support it and to work toward its passage. But let me start out with what Senator Casey said last night at the University of Pittsburgh in an address that he gave. And that is that the only way that disabled people are able to be included and considered in policy is when they truly are in the room making decisions and part of that overall process. It doesn't mean, as he said last night, rubber stamping things from a committee or oversight council. It actually means being there at the onset of the policy, to craft the policy, to support the policy, and to help pass it and make it into law, but then also to actually shepherd it into implementation as well. When he was speaking last night, he closed his comments by saying, inclusion means actual inclusion, the actual involvement of disabled people in their in the issues that actually affect them on a daily basis. And nothing could be truer about a policy issue than when it comes to emergency preparedness and response. It is in many ways the issue of the coming decades. You can see that we are not going to relieve the number of fires, floods, hurricanes, and other disasters that have been coming at such a greater rate, and that ensuring that disabled people are part of the process to plan for and to respond to those events is just critical. So what my boss would say to you if he were able to be here, and he wishes that he actually could be here, is that band together, join as the many arms of the disability community, and really fight to move this policy into reality over the next 4 to 6 months or so. We think that we can actually move parts of this, but we can't do it without getting more people on board these bills and making sure that we are reaching out to all segments of Congress to do that. There is no reason why this set of policies shouldn't be supported literally by everybody. It affects everybody across the board. It affects those who are young. It affects those who are old. It affects those who live in Florida to Washington State, from Maine to California. It is across the country, and it affects all of the residents and citizens of the United States. So this is actually not just bipartisan, but it is nonpartisan. It is across the board. And thank you for the efforts that you're going to put in and have been putting in to making these policies a reality. Shailin and Armand, I'll turn that back to you, but thank you for putting this together. And we hope that this is just one in many, many of the steps of moving forward to make these two pieces of legislation a reality.
This is Armand. Thank you so much, Michael. And please extend our ongoing appreciation and thanks to our champion in disability in the Senate, Senator Casey, and as his constituents, we look for ongoing collaboration with our Senator Casey. Thank you, Michael, for your galvanizing words of action. And it is, as you say, this is the decade that we must turn the paradigm shift around in emergency management. If we do not create inclusive platforms across the board throughout the country, it will be people with disabilities and older Americans that will be in peril, as we've seen throughout the pandemic. Next, we are being joined by Congressman Langevin. Thank you so much, Congressman Langevin, for reintroducing the Ready for Disasters Act and continuing your co-lead support for the Disaster Relief Medicaid Act. Mr. Congressman Langevin.
Very good. Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be a part of this event here today. As was just mentioned, I'm Jim Langevin. I'm the congressman from the 2nd Congressional District in Rhode Island, and I'm the co-chair of the Bipartisan Disabilities Caucus. It's a caucus that I created when I first got to Congress, and I'm proud to still co-chair to this day. And I'm also the sponsor of the Ready for Disasters Act, and also proud to be a co-lead of the Disaster Relief Medicaid Act. So I'd like to begin by thanking Shailin Suzalis and Jermaine Parody. I believe the pronunciation is Herman and Parodi, the co-executive directors of the partnership for their partnership, their leadership for REAADI and DRMA, and for organizing this press call. Marcy Roth, also executive director and CEO of the World Institute on Disability, for her work on these bills, and all the advocates who have worked with our office and the partnerships to draft and enhance the READI and DRMA acts. All of these things are very, very important. So let me begin by just saying, should I give an outline about the bills? Is that appropriate now?
Please.
Okay. So first, just a little bit of background and the need for the policy solution, why we enacted these, we proposed these bills. Disasters, as we know, are increasing in frequency and intensity. So this poses obviously great threat to vulnerable communities, including adults and people with disabilities. And more than 60 million people, more than 60 million people live with disability. More than 48 million senior, also senior citizens. Just by way of example, before Hurricane Ida made landfall, more than 800 residents of several Louisiana nursing homes were evacuated to a warehouse it was supposed to be a safer location. During this process, 7 evacuated seniors died. This is absolutely unacceptable. So addressing the diverse needs of all requires coordination between private entities and all levels of government. In doing so, people with disabilities and older adults need a place at the table. So I've introduced HR 4938, the Ready for Disasters Act, which ensures older adults and people with disabilities are included in the preparation, response, recovery, and mitigation of disasters. And I co-lead this with Representative Chris Smith, Congressman Jimmy Panetta, and also Congressman Albio Sierras. So basically, this creates a network of centers focused on technical assistance, training, and research to assist state and local governments. Okay, it also launches a competitive grant program to pilot strategies that promote inclusion in disaster management. It expands the National Advisory Committee on Individual Disabilities and Disasters to make sure it accurately reflects the diverse characteristics of the disabilities community. And it requires the DOJ and GAO to review whether civil rights have been upheld during disasters and whether previous relief funds have been spent in accordance with the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, as well as the ADA. So I'm also a co-lead of HR 4937. That's the Disaster Relief Medicaid Act, or DRMA, introduced by Representative Panetta, to make sure that Medicaid recipients who are forced to relocate during disasters maintain access to their Medicaid supported services. There's also a Senate companion that's introduced by Senator Bob Casey. The problem is, and why we developed this legislation, is that relocation from one's home state to a host state can mean the loss of access to long-term services and supports. In addition, many states have waiting lists for Medicaid home and community-based services that don't carry over when residents are relocated. So DRMA would make sure that individuals who live in disaster areas maintain access to their Medicaid services if they are forced to relocate to another state. It would provide host states that with a limited 100% federal match to cover services for displaced individuals. So clearly a great need to have this legislation enacted. And going forward, I would say that we need to get these bills over the finish line so that the needs of people with disabilities and older adults are incorporated into disaster management so that Medicaid recipients don't lose access to essential services. I want to encourage everyone to contact their representative and senators and urge them to join as co-sponsors. When representatives and senators hear from their constituents, that's when they're motivated to act the most. So let's make sure they hear from you loud and clear, and let's get them on as co-sponsors of these important pieces of legislation. Thank you.
This is Herman again. Thank you so much, Congressman Langevin, for your strong words and encouragement and leadership in this matter of emergency management, the rights of people with disabilities through the entire process before, during, and after disasters. And as a fellow wheelchair user and quadriplegic and I need LTSS, long-term care service and supports, and through our disaster hotline, we've been responding to hundreds of calls of disabled survivors of Hurricane Ida, and now we get to receive calls from survivors from Hurricane Nicholas. We cannot allow the circumstances that impacted the lives of more than 800 disabled people in the warehouse in Louisiana, as you well explained, and REAADI and the DRMA create the path forward to make sure this does not occur again. Thank you, Congressman Langevin. And also, we continue collecting organizational and individual supporters. We'll put that link on the chat because it will help us continue to educate our Congress people to sign on and support our rights through disasters. Next, we will have Valerie Novak give some words on how the development of these bills follow an inclusive principles to Since Invalid. Thank you, Valerie, for talking on this matter, your support and leadership through this. We remember with you in tens, if not hundreds of meetings 5 years ago, developing this bills and working through it. Thank you so much, Valerie, for joining us today.
Oh, Valerie, you're on mute.
Sorry, thank you. Thank you, Herman and Shaylin and everyone else. I'm going to do a quick description. I am an Afro-Latin person with very short curly hair. I'm wearing black rectangle glasses and a brown top, and just kind of a blank wall in the back there. As Herman said, I think we have worked for a really long time on this bill, and I'm very, very happy to see it be reintroduced. I want to talk a little bit today and quickly about a bit about the process of developing REAADI. And I know Michael talked a little bit about that and earlier, and it being an inclusive effort with people from the community with disabilities. But as it's being reintroduced, I think it even takes on a more significant outcome because of COVID. Now that we are still very much in COVID, but when we first started working on this bill, and people who have been working on this way before I ever came along, trying to make sure that those who are regularly kept out of policy conversations, and particularly when it comes to things like emergency preparedness, people with disabilities, are regularly experiencing the brunt of the disaster impact. And I think when COVID first hit the US, we saw that in ways and on scales we maybe have only seen if we've been paying attention. People who've been doing this work, who have disaster after disaster, saw these events. And now we are in a very real situation in which there have been millions of cases of COVID contracted, and we have untold amounts of people experiencing long COVID at the same time that we are experiencing even more frequent, hard-hitting disaster events, whether that's fires, freezes, hurricanes, or other viruses and illnesses. And so not only was this preemptive and built with the disability community in mind, with the idea of continued feedback, continued accountability for accessibility in emergency management for here going forward. But it's even more important now that we are potentially on a shift where we are going to have so many more people than even 2 years ago that maybe are in need of these kinds of services, that are going to be in need of emergency management and processes, preparedness processes that are considering people that maybe function a little bit differently than who we generally plan for. I saw somebody in the Q&A is already asking a question or mentioning aging communities, and that fits just as much into this. Part of what's amazing about legislation that focuses on including the people that are being affected first, and then also looking across, one of the things you try to do is look across disability type, across functioning ability, in a way that is sustainable, means that even when we're not talking about somebody who's disabled, like Valerie is disabled, the things that I need might help somebody else who maybe doesn't even consider that they're disabled at all. And I think we're finding the need for something like that in COVID. Many people who never would have considered themselves as somebody who is vulnerable in a situation of disaster suddenly found themselves needing at-home services that they'd never considered before. Or maybe they were used to being able to take the subway to work, and now they're trying to figure out, what can you do when you can't access your regular transportation? These are the types of issues that people with disabilities face in disasters and in everyday all of the time, that were not and continue to not necessarily be considered because we don't have these people making the legislation. What READI can do now that it's reintroduced and it has bipartisan support, if we continue to move this forward, allows more diversity at that table and making the rules for how we respond to some of these events that will not just make sure that people with disabilities are better covered so that we don't have the kinds of horrific disparities and outcomes in general that we have had in the past, but so that anybody who may temporarily or permanently function a little bit differently or not have access to maybe some of the things that we consider the general population having access to will also in some way have a voice at the table. And I think I'm hoping that everybody who's on this call now is able to see through hindsight, if not through foresight, how necessary that is. We have just now, in the middle of this experience with COVID, had another instance where quite literally a warehouse of disabled people came out to fatalities. I'm sorry, that took a lot for me to say that, but quite literally a warehouse of people. Only a year after we had the spring of 2020, in which nursing homes were completely ravaged from COVID. And so I'm hoping, like I believe it was Michael that said, that if nothing else, this reintroduction will happen at a time when we're all realizing and really recognizing and grabbing that political will that says this is something that is a public health issue. It's a moral issue, but it's also just a good way of doing policy because there is enough history here in how we have handled emergency management to know who is at risk and who is most at risk and who we need to make sure is accounted for, and READI gets us a step closer to doing that. So thank you again for this opportunity to talk a little bit about why that's important in this time that we're in, and hopefully we get to see this bill move forward. Thank you again, everybody.
This is Shaylin, and thank you so much, Valerie. Really appreciate you highlighting these important connections and making sure folks are seeing that how inclusive we try to and aim to be, and that these representatives, Congressman Langevin and Panetta and Senator Casey, ensuring that our voices are included at these tables. Certainly really appreciate your ongoing support and collaboration in all that you do. Next up, we have Elena Hung, who's famously and probably firstly known as Xiomara's mom, and also known as the executive director and co-founder of Little Lobbyist, here to speak about the impacts that these two pieces of legislation will have on children with disabilities and their families. Elena?
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Shaylin. Thank you, Herman. Thank you for all that you do. Hello, friends. I am Elena Hung. I am a Chinese American woman with straight black hair. I'm wearing a red top and silver earrings. I am the co-founder and executive director of Little Lobbyists, a family-led group advocating for children with complex medical needs and disabilities. And as aforementioned, I am also sometimes better known as Xiomara's mom. I am to join all of you today to talk about a subject that is very personal to me, and that is disaster and emergency planning for people with disabilities. I am a mom. I am a caregiver to a disabled family member. My daughter Xiomara just turned 7 this summer, and she just started 2nd grade via distance learning. I'm thrilled to tell you that Xiomara is thriving today. She is happy, kind, funny, clever, and a little bit naughty. Xiomara is the joy of my life. I am so lucky that I get to be her mom. Now, shortly after she was born, Xiomara was diagnosed with serious medical conditions affecting her airway, lungs, heart, and kidneys. She uses a tracheostomy to breathe, a ventilator for additional respiratory support, a feeding tube for all of her nutrition, and a wheelchair to get around and explore the world. Now, I share my personal story with you because caring for Xiomara has meant being ready for an emergency at any given moment. It means that she must have an awake and alert caregiver who is trained in tracheostomy care at all times. That is round the clock, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It means ensuring that there is always a reliable source of power for her various medical equipment. It means she must have access to her medications, her specialty nutrition, and medical supplies. This is so personal and so real to me and to so many families like mine who love and care for someone who is technology dependent, who has limited mobility, who has complex medical needs, a variety of disabilities. For Little Lobbyist families who care for medically complex and disabled children, emergencies are not a matter of if, they are a matter of when. And we need to be prepared for when emergencies and disasters strike. We need disaster management to be prepared to assist the 61 million people with disabilities and the 48 million older adults across the country. The Real Emergency Access for Aging and Disability Inclusion for Disasters Act, the READI Act that we've been talking about today, will ensure that disabled and older Americans will be included in the preparation, in the response, in the recovery, and in the mitigation of disasters. It means that disabled and older Americans will not be forgotten in their time of need because they are part of the process throughout. You know, I think a lot about what Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley said. Those closest to the pain should be those closest to the power. I'll say that again because I just love it so much. Those closest to the pain should be those closest to the power. And with this bill, those who are directly affected by disasters will have a voice in the policies and the rules that directly affect them. As Valerie just said, we'll have a voice at the table, and that is so, so important. The DRMA Act, the Disaster Relief Medicaid Act, is also one that is very personal to me. My daughter Xiomara relies on Medicaid to survive and thrive. You know, in the event of a disaster that would force our family to relocate to safety, the Disaster Relief Medicaid Act will ensure that she's able to continue to access the life-saving services that Medicaid pays for, including her medications, including the home and community-based services. That is critical because without Medicaid, she may not survive. And that is true for so many people with disabilities and older Americans. Now we have an opportunity to do something really, really important and really amazing for disabled children like Xiomara and for disabled adults and seniors and for everyone who loves them. So I'm here to say, friends, please, 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 please call your members of Congress and encourage them to join as co-sponsors of these two life-saving bills. Please support people with disabilities and older Americans. Oh. Thank you. Thank you to everyone who has been supporting this cause and our families. Thank you to the Partnership for Inclusive Disaster Strategies for your ongoing leadership and partnership. Our families deeply, deeply appreciate you. It has been an honor to speak with you all today. Thank you.
This is Shaylin. Thank you so much, Elena. We appreciate you all and the families within Little Lobbyists and all of your ongoing advocacy and taking these vital pieces of legislation as priorities within Little Lobbyists and in your legislative packets, along with many other organizations across the nation. We're so grateful for your advocacy, you and Xiomara's. Thank you. Next up, we have Norman Smith, who will talk about statewide independent living councils' roles in advocating for these bills. Norman Smith is the chair of the New Jersey Statewide Independent Living Council. Norman will briefly introduce himself, and then you will hear Colleen voicing the rest of his statement. Norman?
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon. My name is Norman Smith. I'm the chair of the Statewide Independent Living Council of New Jersey. It's our pleasure to support these bills because they are very, very important to the lives of people with disabilities to keep us alive. Colleen, can you take over for me, please?
Sure, Norman. For a brief image description, I'm a disabled older white man. My pronouns are he, him. I have short brown hair. I'm wearing glasses, a gray shirt, and a computer stylus headgear. I'm also sitting in my office. Greetings from the state of New Jersey. It gives me great pleasure to speak on behalf of the New Jersey Statewide Independent Living Council in support of these two bills introduced last month. 22 years ago, this council joined the New Jersey Office of Emergency Management to conduct outreach to people with disabilities. In those 22 years, emergency planning involving people with disabilities has evolved to where the idea is not novel or unusual, but the implementation and the practice varies greatly around the country because states choose to ignore the rights of people with disabilities. We saw this again in the pandemic when people with disabilities were left to die because of hasty planning in an emergent situation. Let's be frank about this. There is something fundamentally wrong with the planning process when a state knows that a vaccine will be distributed at some future date and it does not plan for the access needs of people with disabilities living in the community. It is fundamentally wrong, a gross violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act and other civil rights laws, and an obvious devaluation of the lives of people with disabilities. The READI and Disasters Act will change this by focusing a bright national spotlight on the issue through funding research and by expanding a national commission to include people with disabilities, older adults, experts on disability inclusive emergency management, and government and community stakeholders to provide guidance on disability and aging issues before, during, and after disasters. In addition, the READI Act directs the Government Accountability Office to review the spending of disaster funds by federal agencies and states to ensure funds have been spent in accordance with the Rehabilitation Act and the Americans with Disabilities Act. It also requires the Department of Justice to examine how the civil rights of people with disabilities and older adults are or are not upheld during and following disasters. The Council thanks Representative Chris Smith and Representative Albiosides for becoming primary co-sponsors of the READI and Disasters Act. We are proud to see two New Jersey congressional leaders taking on this issue, and we are pleased to see Representative Smith demonstrating that this is a bipartisan issue. The Disaster Relief Medicaid Act will provide uninterrupted access to Medicaid services when recipients must evacuate across state lines, which increases health maintenance and community living and prevents institutionalization during disasters. This bill creates a grant to help states develop an emergency response corps to provide home and community-based services. This kind of corps would have been valuable in the early months of the pandemic to keep people with disabilities out of institutions. Until emergency planners and state officials start including us in their planning, people with disabilities will continue to needlessly die during and after disasters in far greater numbers than need be. We need to stop these needless deaths now through this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, Colleen.
This is Herman. Thank you, Norman. Thank you, Colleen. I want to note, I believe some people were having issues hearing this Norman statement. We will put it in the chat, his written statement, and it'll be part of the material we share when the post-production comes. Thank you for bearing with us all. We all in this virtual world know how technology sometimes doesn't always work with us. But thank you, Norman, and thank you, Colleen, and for those of us that need these services, as you explained, and as Elena explained, and I believe all panelists, we are intricate in the development. Without us, nothing about us without us is at the core of our work. Next, we have Betzada Ramos Sharias, the Executive Director of Movimiento para el Alcance de Vida Independiente, better known as MAVI, the Center for Independent Living in Puerto Rico, who I had the honor to meet and work with while Sheila and I were deployed to Puerto Rico following Hurricane Maria. And the work that they've been doing post Hurricane Maria in inclusive emergency management throughout the island is an example for the rest of the country to follow. Betsy?
Hi, good afternoon to everyone. Thank you, Shailene. Thank you, German, and the partnership for this opportunity. As German said, my name is Betsaida Ramos, also known as Betsy. I am the executive director of MAMI, the independent living, one of the 2 independent living centers that exist in Puerto Rico. I go by the pronouns of she. I am white, Hispanic. I actually have glasses on right now. My hair is sort of blondish, bleached brown, more or less. My hair reaches more or less my shoulder length. I'm wearing a gray sweater at this moment, and in my background, you have my company logo, which is sort of a whirlwind with the colors of gray and blue, which are our company's official colors. So before I start, I want to thank Congressman Langevin and Mr. Mccormick for being with us and giving us this opportunity to hear what so many have been hearing during the past couple of months with regard to these legislative pieces. As an independent living center in Puerto Rico, we became actively involved with regard to disaster management in the aftermath of Maria, during and in the aftermath of Maria. I don't need to rehash what happened. So with regard to the Puerto Rican residents that were living on the island during the hurricane. So Puerto Rico is an island is an island, so we don't have the ability to maybe drive into another state. If there's a hurricane coming in, we have to stick it out or fly out, which oftentimes is not feasible for people with disabilities because of their complicated medical records, conditions, etc. So most of the people on the island had to stay put. And what we saw was a complete lack of preparation with regard not only to the general population on how to respond to a disaster, but specifically to people with disabilities. Most thought that, we can just see to their needs the same way that we do to the general population, which we all know is an absolute erroneous conception. So, statistics tell us that people with disabilities are 2 to 4 more times likely to experiment death or experience increased difficulties with regard to their medical conditions in the aftermath of disasters. And we saw this in Puerto Rico, where we had approximately 2,600 or 4,300, depends on what study you want to listen to, that died in the aftermath of Maria. These were elderly people. These were people with disabilities, with medical conditions that simply died because of the lack of electricity, lack of medications, lack of access to medical services that they needed to survive, to maintain their lives. As a result of Maria, many Puerto Ricans tried to leave the island. And this was a desperate attempt to save their lives, to find something better for their children or for themselves. And they encountered that once they were able to get out on that flight, which was a miracle in and of itself to be able to get out of the island during this disaster, that once they got to the mainland, they didn't have access to their Medicare. This resulted in people being denied essential life-saving services that they needed at this particular point in time. As a consequence, many had to return, very difficult again, because the flights were very limited, or many had to make do with what they had, which resulted once again in worse medical conditions than what they were actually experimenting. And this is unacceptable in a country where, we have so many medical developments, where we have so much technology, where we are viewed worldwide as a leader in so many aspects. It's saddening that we still haven't gotten it right with regard to inclusive emergency management, into coordinated efforts among state, federal, and community organizations. And we're still trying to figure this out. This piece is essential. It's essential for us to move forward. We need the whole nation behind this effort, this piece, and we need to ensure that not just Puerto Rico, all the territories are included within this effort as well. We are separated by bodies of water, but we are part of the United States. We are American citizens. So we need to ensure that we get our act together so that come the next massive disaster, which, as was said at the beginning, they continue to pop up on our radar on a more frequent basis, on a much more intensive magnitude than previous disasters. We can't keep passing this ball around and waiting for someone to pass the torch forward. We need to take action and ensure that people with disabilities on the mainland and in Puerto Rico and other territories are considered. Planning doesn't happen just as a natural act. Planning requires active efforts on behalf of all the members of society. So I congratulate all the senators, representatives that are standing behind these legislative pieces. We need to ensure that this continues to move forward and ensure that these pieces are acted upon and approved for the benefit of these 60 million people with disabilities that was cited at the beginning, the 48 million elderly that are residing in the mainland. Because if not, this is just going to be a selective process of extinction of the most vulnerable, which we know are our people with disabilities. So again, we need to move forward. This is vital in order to maintain the quality of life of people with disabilities everywhere. So once again, thank you for all your efforts. As Independent Living Center in Mavi, you have our support and will continue to have the support and our services and efforts on the ground here to ensure people with disabilities are safe before, during, and after any type of natural disaster. Thank you.
This is Herman again. Gracias, Betsy. And likewise, you have us to count on in preparedness and in disaster response. You know where we are at, and we trust ongoing collaboration with you, and to make sure that not only, as you explained, Puerto Ricans in the territory, but American citizens within all its territories, which is one of the recommendations that we're taking. When we met earlier this year, we made recommendations with the group, and it was added on the bills in this edition. So thank you, Betsy, for that. Moving along, we will be joined by Alyssa Ellis from the group April, the
Association of Programs for Rural Independent Living, April.
And as Betsy was explaining, the issues are not only in territories, but much in rural America. Alyssa?
Thanks, Shaylin and Herman. Hello, everybody, and thanks so much for being here. I will be brief. My name is Alyssa Ellis. I'm the Director of Operations at the Association of Programs for Rural Independent Living, or April. I'm an olive-skinned woman with long black curly hair. I'm wearing a purple shirt, and I use she, her pronouns. April is a national nonprofit grassroots membership organization comprised of Centers for Independent Living, statewide independent living councils, and other independent living organizations. We have members in nearly every state and territory in the United States. As disasters continue to increase in frequency, intensity, and loss of life, passage of Real Emergency Access for Aging and Disability Inclusion for Disasters Act, REAADI, and Disaster Relief Medicaid Act, DRMA, has never been more imperative. COVID has shined a glaring bright light on the gaps that exist the inequities of disaster response as it relates to people with disabilities, particularly those living in rural America, and the failures of not having a disability forward national response plan, which has resulted in many deaths. As the old adage goes, if you don't have a seat at the table, you're on the menu. We have been expected to watch our brothers and sisters with disabilities die in nursing homes, in warehouses, in winter storms that shut down the electrical grids, and during catastrophic weather events all over the country. We've watched as our federal agencies, from the wealthiest, most powerful nation on the planet, who are tasked with saving lives, fail to do so. We cannot continue to watch helplessly from the sidelines, wringing our collective hands and expressing our collective horror. Passing REAADI and DRMA is the best remedy for this. Our government should never be a barrier to saving lives during emergencies. And for those who survive such events but lose everything in the process, we owe it to them to make them whole in an efficient, respectful, and expeditious way. American citizens deserve to have a system which allows their Medicaid benefits to follow them across state lines to safety. We all know that when evacuations happen, those affected are more likely than not to be evacuated to another state. After Hurricane Ida, we in Arkansas have received many people seeking shelter. Furthermore, states with already strapped budgets deserve to have the strain that comes from disaster response alleviated. It is way beyond time that we prioritize the most vulnerable among us. The lives and value of people with disabilities will no longer be negotiated. The Association of Programs for Rural Independent Living fully supports and urges the passage of READI and DRMA. April is committed to getting these passed. The time is now. Let's get this done. Thank you so much.
This is Herman. Thank you, Alyssa, the entire April family and sales in rural America. We need to make sure that we all are included in emergency management, preparedness, and planning, as you well explained, and everyone else. Sheila and I have been day in and day out since 2017, learning with the disability community the needs for inclusive emergency management. We saw it firsthand being deployed to Puerto Rico. And since then, every day, all we think about is how people with disabilities are going to survive the oncoming world, as many have explained. While we have just joined this movement in the last 5 years, we have many to thank for laying the groundwork on inclusive emergency management in the United States. Fellows like Sherry Myers at the Red Cross, Paul Timmis with Portlight, and June Kales have for decades been encouraging the need for inclusive emergency management. While we were in Puerto Rico deployed, Todd Holloway, our fellow first responder, was in the USVI, and since then he has been another of the great effort leaders in this movement with us and for many decades as well. Todd?
Thank you so much, Herman and Shaylin. My name is Todd Holloway. I use he, him pronouns. I work for the Center for Independence in Washington State. I have white, I take that back. I have a black N95 face mask on. I've checked audio to make sure you could hear me. I am a disabled white male with graying brown hair, and I'm wearing a burgundy top. And I'd also like to quickly acknowledge my privilege to live and work on the land of the Salish and Puyallup people. I would like to echo my friends here on this call, their appreciation for Senator Casey and Representative Langevin and all the other staff, Michael Campbell, McCormick, all the effort and time that's been put into this. The partnership has been working on this for quite some time. And going back nearly 200 days, going on 200 days, I'm going to reflect a little bit on where we've been as the partnership and why REAADI and DRMA is so important, but I will be brief. As you heard some key features from Representative Langevin, a lot of those things have been a miracle to have in place during this pandemic. It's incredibly important that we not only think about what's happening, but what could be. And I think that's where a lot of my reflection has been over the past days and months as we have gone through this pandemic health emergency, along with co-occurring disasters, which seem to be getting longer and more plentiful. So just to be brief, I want to say to everyone out there, consider what is in this legislation. If it were in place now, where we would be, the toll, the cost in human life cannot be understated. And to illustrate what we are seeing now and what we will continue to see is not that hard to imagine, because we're seeing it on a regular basis, and the media is covering it so much so that they can't always keep up. So with that said, I want to say thank you to all of you. Please support us, and we'll work as we work together. And I'm going to turn it back to Shaylin and Herman so we can hear from another important, very important mentor of mine.
This is Herman. Thank you, Todd. Always the best. We are nearing our end, but last but not least, our ongoing daily mentor since we got into disaster inclusive emergency response, and who has laid down the groundwork for there to be a federal entity to work on a specifically inclusive the needs of people with disabilities throughout emergency management. Last but not least, thank you always, Marcy. And to everyone, please continue following us at REAADI.com and disasterstrategies.org for ongoing updates. Marcy?
Thank you so much, Herman and Shaylin. I'm Marcy Roth, and I'm the Executive Director of the World Institute on Disability. I'm an older, disabled, white woman with curly COVID gray hair, red glasses, and a blue top. I'm sitting in my office. My pronouns are she and her. Thanks to all of our speakers today and all who have joined with the partnership in the 3 years since Senator Casey first agreed to work with us to transform disability inclusive emergency management to improve disaster outcomes for disabled people, older adults, and our communities. Passage of READI and DRMA will drive true equity, focusing on the rights and needs of disaster-impacted people, and just as important, centering the leadership of disabled and multiply marginalized people in a shared commitment to justice for all before, during, and after disasters. In memory of all who we have lost in disasters, all we have failed, all who are institutionalized in deadly congregate facilities, let's make passage of READI and DRMA a beacon in these very difficult days. Let's work together. Let's put our differences aside and focus on the important work ahead. Thank you very much.
This is Shaylin, and thank you, Marcy, as always, for your ongoing leadership and mentorship and all of your ongoing advocacy throughout the nation for people with disabilities before, during, and after disasters. And thank you all for joining us today for this National Virtual Press Conference. Certainly, there's much more work ahead. This is only the beginning as we all work together to pass these legislations into law. And as Michael put earlier, implementation throughout. Looking forward to the good work together with you all. Thank you for joining us, and we will be in touch. Stay tuned for the post-production and more information to come, and stay safe, everyone. Take care.
Stay safe, everyone.